Greetings and welcome to Let's Talk About Books, baby, where we talk with your favorite LGBTQ plus authors. I'm Anita Kelly, and my guest today is Alice T Friedman. Hello, Alice.
Hey, how you doing?
I am well. How are you doing?
Pretty well, thank you, under the circumstances of our world today.
Yep. It's very strange. It's I don't even know what to say about it.
Well, let's talk about books instead.
There you go. That's always better. Always better. So
For a little break, anyway.
yeah. So Alice, you have a new release, and I think it came out June 1st. Is that correct?
Yeah, May 27th to be exact. But yeah,
Awesome. And
just a couple of weeks ago.
yeah, and it is called Queer Moderns, Max Ewing's Jazz Age New York. Right? Okay.
Yep.
So tell us about that. Tell us all about the book.
Well, the book tells the story of a queer young man who came to New York City in 1923 from a small farming town in the Midwest with the intention of reinventing himself, like a lot of people do when they move to the big city. Reinventing himself as a queer socialite. He was also a concert pianist, and he was a photographer, and he really wanted to wear beautiful clothes and have glamorous friends and be a man about town. And he was 20 when he got there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's what the book is about. It's about his life in New York, and his life was short because he was like a character out of F. Scott Fitzgerald, right? He was someone who made up his own glamorous story and then rose to the top of the New York social scene like Jay Gatsby, only to come crashing down to earth 11 years after he got to New York. He took his own life in 1934, so he's a very short-lived, brilliant, wonderful, interesting person.
So he committed suicide.
Yep, he did.
My goodness. Oh my
Yep,
goodness.
and the reason was he was very close with his parents, oddly enough, because he was very different from the other kids in the farming town there. He grew up in Pioneer, Ohio, but his father died in 1932, and then his mother died in 1934, and he had to go back to Pioneer, a place that he said he would never, ever return to, and he became more and more isolated and lonely and depressed, which was really, really sad. But he was a guy who had loved the world that he invented for himself and that he found in New York. And then, almost literally, he was like a fish out of water. He couldn't live outside of the queer space that he had created.
So he had to, because of his parents' death, he had to go back and take care of the homestead? Is that it?
Yes, exactly. They ran a store in Pioneer, a dry goods store. They were quite successful. And first his dad died, and then his mom, who he was really close to, because they shared an interest in movie stars and fashion. And he wrote to her the whole time he was away. He wrote to his parents long, long letters 3 times a week. But when they died, he didn't have he didn't have supports, and he didn't have an audience. And the world had changed a lot, because when he got to New York, it really was like the jazz age that we talk about when we talk about Fitzgerald, for example, or the Great Gatsby. And then the market crash and like the reinstitution of homophobic laws and repression, even in New York, the world had changed so much, and he didn't change with it. He didn't have good coping strategies. He was a dreamer from beginning to end.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did you become aware of Mr. Ewing's existence? How did you know about him?
Oh, well, see, he's so interesting. Because he wrote these letters, And all the letters and all the photos he took and all the photos he collected, in fact, all his papers are in the Beinecke Library at Yale University. And I was there doing research, actually, on lesbian Paris, American expats in Paris in the 1920s.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and I was really interested in why so many people, particularly lesbians, but why so many queer people moved to Paris and how they lived. I still am really interested in how they lived in hotels or lived in apartments, just everything about them. Mm-hmm. And I discovered a book by an author called Lisa Cohen called All We Know, 3 Lives. And one of the people that I was interested in, a woman called Esther Murphy, is one of the 3 lives. And Lisa Cohen quoted from Max Ewing's letters. Oh. And so when there was a kind of a gap in my research in the Beinecke Library, I thought, his letters are right here. I should start reading them and see what the sorts of things he says. And I just never looked back, because his letters are full of gossip. He loved fashion, he loved food, and he wrote about so many of the people that I was interested in. The first thing he did when he went to Paris in 1925, because he took a trip for a number of months to Paris, and he went also to Venice, he became friends with a lot of the people that I was writing about, like Gertrude Stein and Alice T.
Wow.
Who, are familiar A-list lesbian couple.
Yeah.
And he wrote about what they talked about and what their friends and what they ate. And I was like, this guy is great. And so then I wanted to know more and more about him personally, not just the world that he described in other people's lives.
Wow.
That is kept
amazing.
Working on it for 7 years.
Oh my goodness. That's just amazing that these letters were just available. And who was he writing to? His mother?
He was writing to his mom and his dad. Oh. And when he was in Europe, he wrote to them, but he also wrote to a really good friend of his, an older woman, older than him, called Muriel Draper. And the beautiful thing for a person like me who loves archives is that after he left New York in 1933 because he thought he could move to Hollywood and be a success as a screenwriter. Yeah. He knew a lot of people who were successful in Hollywood, but he himself was not. But when he left New York, he packed up all his letters, all his photographs, all his books, and put everything in storage. And then when he took his own life in 1934, his very good friend, an author and photographer called Carl Van Vechten, went about the project of asking all his friends and all his family members and everybody who he could put pressure on to send him Ewing's letters, with the idea that he would create a kind of a memorial to Ewing. Mm-hmm. And then it was Carl Van Vechten who gave all the papers to Yale. So the way it came about was that someone, that is Van Vechten, understood that Ewing was an extraordinary person, even though he was young and not famous at all, and decided to create this archive of as many papers and photos and bits and pieces of books and whatever else he could find, as not just as a memorial, but he was quite explicit that it would be a wonderful resource for queer history, which it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Van Vechten himself was really interested in queer history. So he was like, and he wrote to the family and he said, like within a month after Max died, he wrote to the family and he said, I really think we should preserve his legacy through his papers and photographs because he was such an extraordinary person.
And And how did you like? Were his photographs easily accessible to you?
They were all at Yale. They were all at Yale. Van
Wow!
Vechten collected everything together, about 1,000 letters, and
Wow!
yeah, exactly. That's why it took so long, and so many photographs too. And Max, being Max, put when he before he left New York City for Hollywood, he put a lot of them into albums. And then after he died, Van Vechten and his lover basically sat down and organized all the papers and dated them and put them into folders and to create this memorial slash archive history of gay life in the 1920s seen through the eyes of Max Ewing. And
Wow!
so there it all is. And I, was incredibly lucky. A lot of people knew about it, but it's overwhelming. And but I never really stopped till I was done.
Yeah. Yeah. That is really wild. So you were working on this for 7 years, did you say?
Yes. Yeah, it's a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is.
But you know what? I have one excuse, right, for the fact that it took so long, and that is in when COVID came along, they closed the library
Oh yeah.
at Yale first to everybody, and then they closed it to everybody who wasn't either a student or a faculty member at Yale. And because I'm not, I wasn't able to go into it for 2.5 years.
Uh,
So I started working on what I had because I took a lot of pictures of the pictures with my cell phone, and I took a lot of pictures of the letters with my cell phone, with thinking, "Oh, I'll be back next week," that kind of thing. I can always come back to these, and bang, the library closed, and it was a long, long time before I was able to get back there to consult the papers and look at the pictures again.
wow.
So that was why it was particularly slow. But it was also slow because I wanted to be able to tell Max Ewing's story, but I also wanted to be able to tell the story of his life in a way that would help us to understand queer history a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. This is amazing. I am like kind of flabbergasted that all like 1,000 letters, personal letters and photographs of this gentleman like is archived.
Yep, it's amazing, and it's such a treasure trove. And I think Carl Van Vechten, the friend of Max's that put the archive together, knew it was a treasure trove because he knew that he was an extraordinary young man with so many different interests. I mean, when he came to New York, his first goal, I guess, his first purpose was to be a success as a concert pianist. And he practiced first he had to find an apartment where he could have a piano and play the piano at all hours of the day and night. And he practiced 4 and 5 hours a day because he was a serious musician. But then he became distracted, and then he hurt his finger in 1928 after he'd been there for 5 years. He hurt his finger, and he really had to give up his dream of being a famous concert pianist.
Oh, that's a shame. But
yeah, he went on, but he, of course, being Max Ewing, endlessly creative young person, he took up photography, he took up sculpture, and he was always an amazing host. He always loved hosting people and showing people the things that he collected. So one of the things that he shared with his friend Carl Van Vechten, who was a writer that he knew even before he left college, because Van Vechten was a reviewer and an essayist. So when Max Ewing got to New York, one of the first people he looked up was Carl Van Vechten, and they had two major interests in common. They both adored cats, and and actually Van Vechten wrote a book called A Tiger in the House
Oh,
about cats.
wow.
And they both loved collecting and then ultimately taking photographs of people. So one of Max Ewing's projects, one of his coolest projects, was he created a sort of 3D album in his walk-in closet of his apartment of all the great heroes and celebrities and famous people and writers and artists of queer history. That was based on clippings from newspapers and magazines, and he created this like 3D scrapbook by basically papering the walls with all of these images.
Does Are there photographs of that?
That's when he took it down, when he left for Hollywood.
Yeah.
He labeled them all really carefully. But one of the things he did was he would invite people to his apartment to see this. He called it the Gallery of Extraordinary Portraits. So Max Ewing is a person who always took himself really seriously and took what he did seriously. So, of course, he didn't just collect photos. He created this space, this queer space of photography of portraits of queer heroes.
Yeah.
And then he gave it a name, the Gallery of Extraordinary Portraits. And then, if that wasn't enough, he numbered each of the images and created and printed a catalog so that people could pick up a catalog when they came over to his house and basically tour this tiny 4-foot by 4-foot closet and look at the pictures with their catalogs in their hands so they would know what they were looking at.
Wow.
Isn't that so cool?
That
and
is.
So that's all in my book because, of course, being Max Ewing, he recorded, not only he saved all the pictures, he labeled all the pictures, he made the catalog, and then other people took pictures of him. I have one really cool picture of him sitting in the closet, and it literally is a closet. It's 4-foot by 4-foot.
Oh my goodness.
Sitting in there with all these pictures behind him.
And you think about someone doing this like today, and it's like, oh yeah, like they have all the technological help, and it's probably very easily done, right? But back then, he had to like probably go to a printer, get the layout, very different, and that probably took a long, long time.
Exactly. There are like over 200 photographs, and he wrote like a catalog entry for each image with a little description. So he wrote that out, then he typed that out, then he took the list to a printer and produced this catalog. And because, again, going back to this idea of saving pieces of paper and saving people's legacies,
Yeah.
Yale actually has 2 or 3 copies of that catalog.
Really?
In Max Ewing's papers. His cousin had one, and I think he saved one. And so you can look at the drafts of the typescript that he made when he typed it all out, and then there are a couple of examples of the catalog itself.
That's so cool. I think
it's really special.
If he were alive today, like I think of someone like, although she's pretty old, like Rona Barrett. I don't even know if she is still living, but like she was, like the Hollywood reporter, gossip queen, right? Like I could see him doing something like that very easily.
Yes, and I've often thought he was a lot like Andy Warhol.
Wow.
Because Warhol did a project where he used a Polaroid camera to take snapshots of lots of his friends at Studio 54 and out on the street, and
Yeah.
friends from all walks of life.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what Ewing, they both, Andy Warhol and Max Ewing both loved glamour.
Yeah.
And they loved celebrity, right? The idea that celebrity would rub off on them and and that stardust would transform their lives. Ewing, he was totally into the idea of a star-studded, glamorous life.
Wow. Wow. It's just wild. It really is that he was living so long ago doing this.
Yeah, in the 1920s.
Yeah.
So it's 100 years ago, actually, right in this time frame, right? Because he got to New York in 1923, and he left for his trip to Paris, to Europe in 1925, and he was there till 1926. So I know I've been thinking a lot about that. It's a really cool century interval from now to so long ago when Max Ewing was doing his thing.
Yeah.
I think he would have loved Instagram.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
totally.
He could keep up with everybody and see what everybody was doing, and also create stories and create an archive of his friends and his interests. And I don't think he was always bragging in his letters to his mother about his glamorous life and all his cool friends and who he met and where he went. And so he never seemed to experience FOMO the way people do when they look at other people's Instagram feeds. He was the center of his universe, and he wanted to keep it that way.
And do we have documentation from other people where they mention him?
Oh, that's such a great question. There are some letters to other people where they mention Max Ewing, and there are some diaries in other collections, though not in Ewing's collection,
right?
But in other people's collections, he was a friend and a rival for this lady's attention, Muriel Draper's attention, of a man called Lincoln Kirstein, who was one of the initial sponsors of the American Ballet Theater in New York.
Okay.
And the choreography, choreographer Balanchine. And he was, as I say, he was his rival, and they were in the same sort of social circles. And in his diaries, he's sort of hateful about Max Ewing because Lincoln Kirstein was very snobbish, and he didn't like anyone who hadn't gone to Harvard, and Max Ewing had not gone to Harvard. He had dropped out of the University of Michigan, and he was also a very different kind of queer kid than Kirstein was, right? Kirstein was a kind of, macho, masculine, bisexual guy, and Max Ewing was just 100% dreamer, glamour, queer kid.
Flamboyant. I picture.
Yeah,
that's what I'm
exactly.
picturing.
And I think Kirstein would have said that he was exactly what the people in Pioneer, Ohio had said. They thought he was girly, and they thought he was a sissy and all this. And, a lot of gay men at the time that Max was alive went to great lengths to hide anything that would suggest that they were gay.
Sure.
And Max, he took a lot of risks. I think he just was not really a realist. That's for sure. He was not a realist. So, and that Kirstein was very horrible about Ewing. After he died, he said, "Well, I'm not surprised. He was, I didn't care." Basically, Kirstein said. So we have stuff like that where people are like, "Ugh, don't like him one bit. He's too out there." But of course, you would expect that, right? With someone who was so flamboyant and dramatic and sort of self-invented, right?
Yeah, and if you're not really out and you're trying to really be something you're not, he might be a threat to you.
Yeah, I think he was a threat to him, and literally in his self, presentation, but also they both loved and wanted the attention of the same woman.
Okay.
Max Ewing did not. It's very hard to know what his private life was all about.
Okay.
Because his letters were to his parents.
Sure. Yeah.
So, it's not a topic he went into.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, he seems like one of those people who, is very self-protective and makes up a dream world that's incredibly beautiful and incredibly star-studded and glamorous, but doesn't sort of descend into the world of intimacy and emotions and the messy life of people's emotion or sexual lives.
Yeah.
Or his own, right? The messy details of relationships. He kind of stays above all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a weird way.
Yeah.
In a weird way. He's very, very self-protective.
Yeah. Not really grounded in reality. Like only
Yeah.
chooses, like I guess picks and chooses what he wants to see and be around and talk about even, right?
Yep. And it's interesting too, because if you think about it, there are people who want everything, especially in literature. I'm just thinking when you're talking about, some of the characters in Tennessee Williams plays and stuff, who no matter how, like Blanche Dubois, no matter how down to earth the world they're living in is, and how simple or how poor or how rough, they're still, pushing and trying to make everything beautiful.
Yep.
And special and refined and elegant, even if it's only in their fantasy lives.
Yep. Yep.
And Ewing was kind of like that.
Yeah.
It's as far as what he wrote. And then, he created this queer space in his apartment, not just the gallery, but, the people he invited over and the way they talked and the way they lived. It was just very different from the world outside the four walls of his apartment, let's just say.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to think about like that is how someone survived back then. Like people are still surviving in that manner today, right? Creating their own worlds, fantasy worlds, because the real world sucks,
Yeah, and that's the other thing I think is a good takeaway about his life. He was entirely authentic, right? Mm-hmm. He was as queer as he could be, and he was as different as he could be, and he didn't give up on that world as he saw it. Mm-hmm. And if he when it came to living in the quote unquote real world, where people would think that he was, twisted or abnormal or a sissy or queer, a fag or whatever they would say about him, he didn't go there. He just stayed as far away from. He tried to, and then when he couldn't stay out of it any longer, he just went on this downward spiral. He really hated, I think in some ways, he hated the world of small town America and didn't want to live there. He didn't want to live if that was where he had to live.
And of course, he's an artist, so he's, most artists are super sensitive.
Yep, he was very sensitive.
Yeah, yeah. I can understand.
He was very sensitive in, his writing and his everything he did, in this kind of beautiful, precise, elegant, perfectionist way. And, he in some of the letters, it's kind of interesting. In some of the letters, he squabbles with his mother. His mother, towards the end of her life, she herself had problems with mental illness, and she started saying, you're a failure now, and I don't think I could stand it if you're a failure, because she had put all her whole life and confidence into him being a successful musician and being a big, successful social mover and shaker in New York. Mm-hmm. But so 10 years in, right, in 1933, she was writing him saying, you should come home. I think you're a failure. Mm-hmm. And I'm not interested at all in movie stars. And he wrote her back and was like, you've always been interested in movie stars. What are you talking about? And they shared movie magazines. But when she started to give up on all of that, he did push back, but then she died, right? And left him alone. Yeah. And being alone, I think, was the last thing he wanted to do.
Yeah. She was his rock, like his safe place.
Yeah, and it's interesting because his mom, the other thing that's interesting, I think, about his story is both of his parents accepted him for who he was.
That's so cool. That's
Isn't that it's really cool. They loved him, and when he said, "Oh, I want to take snapshots of this handsome new boy I met," and he would always say, "I met the handsomest boy," and his father lent him his Kodak snapshot camera that he had, sent it to New York, and that's how Max Ewing started taking pictures of all his friends.
Yeah.
And then he learned how to print photos, and he created these albums of portraits of his friends. So that's the other way in which he's important, because his albums are a record of this social world that we don't usually think of as being one world. We always think of it as disparate worlds, like the world of the Harlem Renaissance and the world of queer white people and the world of writers. And there they all are in Max Ewing's albums.
Yeah. It's just awesome. It really is. It's very intriguing. Like, you want to know more. It's I can easily see how you just kind of were drawn to this guy and wrote this book about him, because, he really is interesting and unusual, right?
Totally. I agree. Yeah, he's totally unusual.
Yeah. So, Alice, I have to ask you, right? So, the political climate right now has really pushed a lot of industries, a lot of corporations to backpedal in their support of LGBTQ plus world. Like, I just looked at a list The Advocate put out of corporations who, in the past have supported pride events in various cities, and they're not any longer, like major ones like Anheuser-Busch, which I was kind of shocked about. But so I'm wondering,
it's shocking and it's infuriating.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But I think, well, were they just in it like for the almighty dollar? Like, is that what it was all about? It wasn't about really doing the right thing, or you'd be doing the right thing.
I think the former, that I think for a lot of people, it was a really good marketing strategy to seem open to queer people. And certainly, I mean, we've all read a lot about queer consumers having, at least, a lot of gay men have, according to the statistics, right, more disposable income, more money to spend.
Yeah, because they don't have kids. For the most part. I mean, some do.
Exactly. That's the stereotype anyway. And so these big corporations would be like, well, let's have a marketing campaign where we show two guys buying a house, two guys buying a car, two women using our products or our linens or upscale, anything. And I really do think that when they're, with all the pushback on diversity and pushback on inclusiveness, a lot of people have backed away.
Yeah, they have. I was on going down to Philly. I think it was like last week or something. But on the highway, there was a billboard, and it was for an insurance company, and it was two women together in like an intimate situation, and I was like, that's so cool. And I think it was State Farm. I can't really remember now, but but I was like, wow, that is so cool. Like right now they're doing that, in this climate. So, but I'm wondering, have you faced any pushback or censorship related to queer content when, you were publishing this?
Well, I think it's a great question because I think it's something to be aware of, right? I haven't literally faced any pushback, but I worry that some bookstores, for example, won't promote a book like mine with the word queer in the title. And I want, let alone put it in the window, displays, not because they're afraid, that they'll lose funding or all of those things that we're seeing in the Republican pushback against diversity and inclusion, but because of sort of a much more insidious, like understated worry about public relations or what if, because this climate that we're in gives permission to people to be homophobic
and to act out on their
exactly to act out their homophobia.
Yeah.
So if you were to put, I don't know if you were a person that was saying, well, should we put this book in the window, or will a group of people come and smash the window because they're acting out their homophobia and they have permission to in this political climate.
Yeah.
So that's what I worry about. Yeah. And I think it just, it's something that we can't back off from doing this kind of work because of that.
Right.
But and from telling these queer stories, because that's, I'm very lucky to be able to do that. And we're very lucky also, after all these years of, secrecy and homophobia, we're very lucky to be able to use the word queer in public and to talk about queer subjects. And so we can't be intimidated, but I do think that it's a healthy awareness of what some people are feeling. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. No, you're right. It really is.
I'm sure it'll happen. I'm pretty sure it'll happen. But, the climate is obviously very changed even from 6 months ago. And some people are like, back away from it, right? Yeah. Back away. Not going to use the word queer.
Yeah.
Let alone, homophobia is one thing, and the resurgence of overt racism is worse, or it's just bad, right?
Yep. And I think I don't know if it's worse, but we hear more about it for sure. Well,
Max Ewing was really interesting on that topic too, because it was not just a queer positive environment that he lived in, but Carl Van Vechten and Max Ewing and Muriel Draper and their friends were really committed to having an interracial, diverse, social and cultural environment, and that they would foster the art and writing of their Black friends. And at a couple of points, he mentions that because he had an exhibition of his portraits at the Waldorf Astoria, believe it or not, hotel in 1933.
Yeah.
And he went to his mom and said, they put up all the portraits, but they didn't include any of the portraits of my Black friends. I guess they weren't as welcoming. Something, very understated. I guess they weren't welcome at the Waldorf Astoria.
Yeah, he was very much aware of that.
Oh, he was, of the racism. Yep.
Yeah. And that makes me think, did he like hang out in Harlem? Do you have any like
He
idea
did.
about? Did he? Okay. Cuz that's where a
He
lot
did.
of like I think about like right the Cotton Club right that's where that was located, and that's where a lot of the great jazz music was it kind of grew out of.
Mm-hmm. And there were also gay clubs up in Harlem. Um, and he, particularly because of his friendship with Carl Van Vechten, who I've mentioned so many times, um, he Van Vechten was the person who introduced him to the cultural and social life of Harlem, Harlem nightclubs, Harlem dancers, Harlem black artists from Harlem, and for a period there, from about when he first arrived in the the early 1920s until about 1932, they would go on these, binges of drinking and dancing with a group of friends, 2 or 3 or even more nights a week, and up in Harlem. And, by that point, so they were sort of pioneers in that world
Yeah.
as white people
Yeah.
and as people who tried to have friends and have a more equal relationship with the people they met. Following from their interest, there was a big craze amongst white people to go up to Harlem to nightclubs, not with the intention of learning more about writers and artists and dancers who were black, but of just for entertainment purposes, like you say, the places like the Cotton Club to hear jazz and things like that. So it became a huge fad
Yeah.
until the early 1930s.
Yeah. I just Googled Carl Van Vechten, and the first thing that came up was Brandeis University has an online exhibit of his African American portraits.
Yep.
So that's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, and so he's famous for that, and Ewing is not famous at all, but he also took a lot of photographs. Now, Carl Van Vechten lived until the 60s, right? So he was still going strong
Yeah.
for decades and decades and decades, and he took over 9,000 portraits.
Yeah, and as that photography like advanced, he was right there with it, and yeah.
Yep.
Whereas
And
Ewing
so
wasn't.
what he did on a large scale was what Max Ewing did on a small scale. He wanted to record the appearance and the existence of all his friends and then all the famous people he knew, but it was particularly dedicated to promoting his African American friends. So that's why there's that archive at Brandeis and a bunch of other archives of Van Vechten's work. So that same idea that he shows in creating all those portraits is a similar idea to the one that he had when he said, well, this young man has died at the age of 31, and he was an extremely cool person, and he collected extremely cool things and wrote amazing letters. And so what I'm going to do is spend the next, 5 years basically asking everybody to send me every shred of paper, every photograph that relates to Max Ewing, and I'm going to make this archive.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and that's what Van Vechten was an interesting character because he was a collector, right? He collected people, he collected photographs,
Yeah.
he collected pieces of paper.
Yep. That's great.
Yep.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
so awesome.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's wonderful that he did that. He kept Max Ewing alive for all of us.
Isn't it extraordinary?
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. So Alice, I have to ask you, what do you hope readers, especially like the LGBTQ plus readers, take away from your work?
Well, I think a couple things. One is to just know that those stories exist of queer people in the past, and that we can find out about them, and we can read about them, and we can celebrate those people. Mm-hmm. And some of those people are like Max Ewing, who lived every moment that he could to be his authentic self.
Yeah.
Right. And he was supported in that. Mm-hmm. So at a certain point, when the supports went away, the negative forces overtook him.
Yeah.
But I think the takeaway is that people like him existed, that we can know about them, we can celebrate them. And in many ways, Ewing was very, not just extraordinary, but he was quite brave in trying to be his authentic self. And I think there's something to be said for that, to keep being creative. Mm-hmm. And he was, in his own way, he as I said, he didn't really get in the messy involvement of intimacy, and whether emotional or sexual. We don't have that much evidence of that. Mm-hmm. And whenever someone of his friends would have a massive crush on him, and he would back away. He really didn't want to, get into messes. Yeah. But he, his story tells us that you can take all that energy, if you're somebody like Max Ewing, and use it to create in creative ways, in music and art and writing, and that there are lots of different ways to live. Yeah. I think that's the other thing. Mm-hmm. He's just an extraordinary person.
Yeah. Yeah. He really is. Remarkable. Just remarkable.
Well, and the other takeaway is don't throw anything away. You'll never know when you'll never know when something will cast light on, or shed light on how we lived in, the 1960s or the women's movement of the 1970s. I saved a lot of things, and I gave all these women's periodicals that I had collected in the 1970s, mm-hmm. From my own experience.
Yeah.
Old volumes of the magazine Signs and things like that.
Wow.
And I didn't think of them as being important, or things at the time you don't think you're so important. And then you realize, wow, that's a huge and interesting documentation of how we lived and what we were striving for.
Yeah. It absolutely is. It's like and it's grassroots, right?
Yep. And who would have thought that Max Ewing's letters to his mom about what he did and what he ate and what he wore and what color drapes such and such a person had in their apartment would be important. But for someone like me, it was a gold mine. I was so interested to know what color drapes they had in their apartment.
Heck yeah. I mean, it's...
Yeah. Yep.
So, Alice, are you currently working on a new book, or do you have any plans for a new book, or taking a break for a while? Oh, okay.
No, this one, remember I said I was trying to write about American lesbians in Paris?
Oh, yeah.
When I discovered Max Ewing. Mm-hmm. And it is a chapter of a book that I'm working on called Poker Faces.
Oh.
And Poker Faces are houses and apartments that are camouflaged in a way by looking completely unremarkable and ordinary, but where unconventional or queer households have created new ways of living behind those walls.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, so they're literally like poker faces where you can't tell what's going on behind the face.
Yeah.
It doesn't reveal anything. And so they're very, very modern houses that don't look modern at all.
Huh. How cool. And this is like history, right? It's a history.
More history.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's all history. Because as you can tell from anybody who'd spent 7 years looking through somebody else's little shreds of paper, that's That's what I really love is archives and history and trying to reconstruct how people lived.
Wow. So that is fantastic. I'm so glad that you do what you do. And
Well, thank you for being interested in it, and I hope the book is, when you get a chance to read the book, I hope you find that the stories are exciting.
yeah, I'm sure I will. I can't wait to jump in and start reading some of his letters. So listeners, check out Alice T Friedman's new release called Queer Moderns, Max Ewing's Jazz Age New York. I think you're going to love it. It sounds like we in this generation owe a lot to Max for doing all he did, right?
I think so.
Yeah, our forebearer.
Yep. And we don't have, we haven't had the good fortune to know enough about them, our forebears in queer history. And so that's a really important takeaway, that they're out there and we can know about them.
Absolutely, it is definitely. So Alice, do you have any parting words for our listeners?
I think, read books about history. A lot of times we read novels and stories, and we, like to lose ourselves because it's hard to live in the world, and it's wonderful to read works of fiction, but I think it's very rewarding to learn more. As you say, you called him our forebear. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to learn and to be able to tell the truth about the past, right? That not only were people like Max Ewing part of the, let's say, modern movement of the 1920s, but there's a way to know about them, and it's not just, the history is not just the history of straight white people.
Yeah.
But it's more interesting than that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. And, I think we do tend to, we want to escape, and we see, novels as a way to escape. But life is messy. And we can definitely learn from our messy history, right?
Yep. Yep. And also learn from people like Max, who strove so hard to stay out of messes and wanted the world to be beautiful and elegant and stylish.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, me too.
So, all right. Well, Alice, thanks so much for being with us today. And again,
thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your wonderful questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure talking with you. And don't forget to check out Alice's book called Queer Moderns, Max Ewing's Jazz Age New York. So that is all the time we have for today. I'm Anita Kelly, and thanks for joining Let's Talk About Books, baby. So until next time, may your journey be lighthearted, peace be plenty, and be safe out there, folks.